I know. I know. Welcome back to Michael Explains It All. These are the all-new Thomastik Dynamo violin strings. Now, since I published my first video about these strings, and I've read a lot of comments on the YouTube and on violinist.com, and I've also been taking them to gigs and talking to other violinists there, the overarching sentiment that I'm sure you're feeling is, another set of strings? Another set of strings? And just to kind of unpack that a little bit, I understand. I can see both sides of this story. Is that, on one hand, violinists are not used to there being regular string releases like every year. If this was a phone, there's an iPhone or an Android phone that comes out every year, and we're used to that. But strings are this is unfamiliar territory. And it also opens up this doubt or uncertainty that, are the strings that I'm currently playing actually the best strings for me? Or is there something better? There's got to be something better for me.
And me? Wait a minute, what about me?
Dynamo strings. No, I probably won't use that. But the point is that who would also, in the same breath, drive down the street and look at all the restaurants and say, oh, another restaurant? Or like flip through Netflix and be like, oh, another movie? I like Star Wars. I just want to watch Star Wars till the end of time. No, I don't think you would say that. It's because it's nice to have options. It doesn't mean that it's the perfect string for everybody, just like Star Wars is not the perfect movie for everyone.
Most impressive.
But it's nice to have options, and I think this is going to be a very popular string set. And sort of to set the stage to understand this string and what Thomastik is going for with the release of Dynamo strings requires just a brief history lesson. So take it away, Professor.
Since the creation of the violin, the strings were made via sheep guts, a gut string. Don't worry, the sheep had very happy lives, and they had just eins bad day. And then we made strings out of them. Fast forward until 1910, we have the first steel core string. Violinists, they love the steel core string. Lots of power, fast response. However, not so warm string. We fast forward to the 1970s, and a small company named Thomastik has created the first synthetic core string with the introduction of dominant, and it takes the violin world by storm. Most of the violinists love the dominant strings with the synthetic core because it sounds like gut strings, but still has some modern power. In the year 2000, we have Prerequisite evaporated green, which again takes the violin world by storm. The new modern materials over a synthetic core has the warmth, but has more focus, more brilliance, more overtones than the dominant have. And subsequently, all the strings have been trying to increase this formula, to increase the power, the focus, the brilliance, the magnificence of the violin.
So as the professor was explaining, there's been a movement from the gut core to steel core to synthetic core, and ratcheting up the power and brilliance and clarity. But I actually kind of left off there. The professor did. I'm sorry, I don't know who he was. Sort of moving back, that I've seen a lot of people playing evaporated golds, and we had dominant pro, and I still see a lot of people playing obligatos. And I think right now we're at a time when people are looking for a little more warmth, still an open sound. They still want a quick response. They want a big, soloistic sound, but a little bit, things are getting a little narrow and a little too clear. And dynamo strings are that. It's a gut-like sound. It has a lot of warmth, but it has a lot of richness, a wide harmonic spectrum, which sort of does mean that the strings are a little noisier. There's a little more bow noise that you're going to hear in these, but it translates into more color and more flexibility in tone. Not necessarily flexibility in string tension because they're not a low tension string. They're still a medium tension string. So it's an all new synthetic core. There's new materials, new glue, new windings. There's a lot of information. I'll try to distill it down for you here as I hope to explain it all. But one of the things that I can do that I don't think a lot of the videos on YouTube have done yet is destroy almost $500 worth of strings to compare them to Passione strings and Pi strings, the other flagship strings from Thomastik, as well as Larsen Virtuoso, which I think have some similarities. So I'm going to get to that and stop rambling. Well, I'm going to ramble a lot later, so buckle up. One last illustration to kind of give you a bird's eye perspective of the strings is Thomastik has published a chart with lots of graphs and comparing their strings, and it's a great chart, but you really need like a three-dimensional view of it because just seeing it is not the whole picture. I think if I also wanted to add to it and give you my graph from broad to focus is that dynamo strings are the broadest sound, moving towards dominant pro after that, Pi strings, and then rondo strings as we get more focused. So from broad to focus, that's what how I kind of hear these strings. So let's hear these strings now. So good. I'm really enjoying playing these set of strings, but let's talk about the nuts and bolts on Gibble's grading graph. Was there a fourth G that I forgot about? I can't remember. Anyways, to get started, projection. Very loud, a full set of string. It's for soloists. It's for professionals. This is like, this is a big sound. It is a different way of achieving it. I've played a lot of Pi's on this violin, and they really couldn't be farther apart. When I play Pi's, it's this like power and strength and tension, and when I play the dynamos, it's a much fuller, just sort of open set of strings, way of getting power. For me, it feels a little bit like on dynamos, it's like I'm coasting down a mountain at 80 miles an hour. Versus when I had Pi's on, that's like I'm driving on the flats going, and like that's in a car. Maybe that wasn't the best illustration, but it's a different. Both are loud. In both cases, I'm going 80 miles an hour. It just feels like the dynamo strings are it's a little bit more relaxed. It's a little bit lower tension. Doesn't feel as. Maybe that comes at the expense of not being quite as snappy. Let's talk about color. There's still a pretty neutral set of strings. I think they lean a little bit more on the dark side.
Most impressive.
But pretty neutral, and I think Thomastik also puts them pretty much smack in the middle, just like dominance. Convenient, though. I'm gonna mostly agree with them. I think they would be just a little bit darker. That's great. All right, let's get to what I think is the most significant characteristic of these strings, and that is the focus. I put them pretty much as far as you can go on the open side. Some people call this broad or rich. I think of it sort of like a flashlight. If you have a big searchlight, like a mile away, the light beam is very open. It's very broad. Versus if you have a laser beam a mile away, that laser beam is still laser focused. And so these strings really just feel very open. They feel very, almost a little fuzzy. I'll get to that later on, but it just feels like that leading edge of the sound is very wide, very, I'm gonna say dull, but it's not a dull, like lack of interesting sound. So this is why it's murky. Do you see? Murky. I'm in the matrix here. Let's talk about depth, still incredibly deep. And I think that's also that's sort of connected to the complexity. There's a depth to it and a quality of sound that's hard to just articulate by me talking about it. When I think you hear it on your instrument, you'll be like, oh, I hear that is a different sound than what I've been playing. Now this is, again, the response is interesting because it's related sort of with tension, yes, and these are still a pretty quick set of strings. They're probably not the fastest, and there are some things you can do to manipulate the sound, such as switching the E string if you want more response for the E string, as well as how that affects the G string. I'll get to that in a minute. But comparing them to the strings that I'm gonna play back to back here in a second, Dynamo strings, really only the D string is the lowest tension of all the other 4 sets that I'm playing right now. Really, Virtuosos, Passiones, those have much lower strings, and if you really even looked at Dominant Pro, those are even a lower set of strings. So it doesn't come, all this warmth and depth and breadth of sound doesn't come at the expense of a lower tension, which is why at first I was a little skeptical. I was like, I'm not really the biggest fan of like Dominant Pro and Pirastro's Violino strings that are kind of low tension. That's not really for me. So Dynamos are not that. There's still a lot of great response. The last category is also where I think I'll probably lose some people, is because these are pretty far in this sort of fuzzy description. Fuzzy is kind of a mean word to use to describe it. It's just that there's a lot of bow noise. There's kind of a lot of Fritz Kreisler in the sound. And that's not something that most people prefer or pursue even. I think a lot of these strings that we've had access to were very clean, very, very clear, but it comes at the expense of not quite as much color. It's a little bit of a sterile sound. So this is a much different string sound. And some people, I think, will really like it. Some people not so much. One of the things that I think Thomastik writes in some of their copy that is a little confusing is they say you can modulate the colors, or there's lots of flexibility in the sound. And sometimes that's confusing because it's like modulation is like a key center term. I don't think about it. And flexibility sometimes means like tension. So what are we actually talking about? And I think it's related to this clarity that there's lots of color in the string, that you can play the same music or play the same notes in different styles and get different colors out of the string. So if I played that Kreisler example, in like a small setting or small room, I might play. But if I was in a giant recital or giant concert hall or something, you might. You might have to crank it up a little. That's a little too aggressive, obviously, but the point is that you can get different sounds, by just playing using different amount of pressure or different amount of bow speed. You can get different colors. Just out of curiosity, if I played like the Sassonces. If I played it softly. Oops, I missed, oops, I missed, oops, I missed. And so that, I think, gives you, there's lots of color there, that the strings have a sort of a wide, that's partially what we're referring to when we say like a wide dynamic range or a wide harmonic spectrum. Kind of, it's a little bit of a soupiness in that. All right, enough rambling of the graph. I know, here's the moment you've been waiting for. Let's hear how these strings sound compared against 3 of the other sort of similarly priced and similarly toned set of strings on the same violin, same bow. And I'm just gonna switch out the strings and let's get to it. So hopefully that got us one step closer to answering the question of what do these strings sound like in comparison to some strings that have already been around for a while and maybe are strings that you already play. I really enjoy them. I think there were some interesting things that they were pretty close in sound to the Passione strings. The tuning stability of the dynamos was a dream compared to what I just went through trying to get those Passione strings that are a gut core to stay in tune. So, I mean, eventually, yes, Passione strings do sort of get a little bit better, but the first couple days, it's a struggle. Virtuoso strings were also very nice. Yes, they are about half the price as compared to the dynamo strings right now. Which leads me into this conversation about sort of an inconvenient truth or inconvenient fact is that they are expensive. Right now they're gonna take the place as the flagship, the most expensive string that Thomastik has to offer. They're about $142 when they launch in mid-March of this year, and if you were to throw on that platinum E string, which adds another about $37, this is like almost a $180 string set, which might be the most expensive string set in the world. Don't quote me on that, but I can't think of anything else. Cellists are also laughing at us right now, being like, that's not expensive for what a cello set of strings costs. However, one argument that I'm hearing from Thomastik is that longevity matters and that these strings are going to last a long time. Yes, they've been in the works for over 4 years, so they have tested this for a little while. I have not, so I can't personally speak to that. There is sort of quality that is a good indicator, and that is when a string starts off having a Mettalica-y sound to it, that's directly proportional to its longevity, to the longevity of the string, of how long it's going to last. A good example of that is we love Eva Prassi strings because boom, right out of the gate, they sound amazing. They're pure, they're clean, they're sparkly. They also don't last quite as long. And so I think the dynamo strings have a little bit of that. The first couple hours, day maybe, there is some of that metal-y sound. Eventually that wears off to that nice open warmth that you'll get. Oh, good. So I know that's a lot of money, that's no joke. But something I would like to point out is that Thomastik has set the price at $142 because it's a new product. I can guarantee you these other strings that you're probably comparing to, like, oh, I can get Eva Prassi's for $100. Yeah, that's what it's cost right now, but I can guarantee you those strings will increase in price too because they have for years. They've already more than doubled what they initially came out as. So hopefully Thomastik will keep this pricing where it is for a couple of years, and probably those strings that are $20, $30, $40 less right now are probably going to creep up and match what dynamo strings cost. It's just kind of the way of the world. It's unfortunate. But does bring me to the point of who are these strings for? If you're a soloist and you're playing recitals and solo repertoire, or you're playing auditions and competing against 100 other people all playing the same thing for only 30 seconds behind a screen, do you need every advantage that you can get? You do. And so these strings could, I'm not going to say that they're going to make the difference for you, but if you could give yourself a little advantage and help your violin sound even better, then it's probably worth it. For more casual players, it's also a great set of strings if your violin is kind of in that tight kind of sound, if it sounds a little plugged and a little nasally, that it will open up the sound and give you a little more warmth. It's not going to completely change your instrument, of course, but it's a small thing that you can do, as well as in combination or in concert with other free things you could also do, like use more bow and play beautifully and in tune And so I don't know, I'm channeling some inner teachers I've had.
When I was your age at conservatoire, I practiced 17 hours every day, and nobody liked it.
I know it's a tough balance to justify, is it worth spending that much money? Only you can answer that question for you, but it's a string is versatile. It's useful for many different applications, fiddle music, classical music, doesn't matter. If you want just a nice, open, broad sound with lots of colors, then Dynamo strings are a very exciting new string. I think they're going to be very popular. An interesting thing I learned in this process in talking with Stoyan, the product specialist at Thomastik, was about how even just changing the E string can change the overall sound of your violin.
You can try with 26, 26.2, 24, 25, 27, 26, 7, also 5 or 6 E string. You can put on the same set, with same set, you will get 5 completely different options.
Wow. And that if you change the tension of the E string, it's going to change the tension on the G string as well. And so if you were to put on that 8.3 kilogram tension E string, the 27 millimeter one that's from the Pi set, that's going to increase the tension over here, and that's going to loosen the tension on the G string. So it is going to give your E string more power and more brilliance, but it's also going to take away some of that color from the G string. It's going to make the G string also more focused, a little less color. When you kind of even things out with the E string that is included with the Dynamo set, is a little bit lower tension, you're going to have a little bit more color on the G string as well. You could ask yourself, well, I spend 80% of the time playing high notes on the E string. I want the most power and brilliance for the E string. I don't really spend that much time way up here on the G string. Conversely, you might feel the other way. So there are some very interesting things that even like a much more affordable E string could change the sound of your set. I can tell even in that short recording that when I had the Dynamo E string, that lower tension E string or lower gauge E string, that the G string had a lot more color. It was an open sound, it had a kind of a nice fullness, and I think my violin responded nicely to it. Yes, it comes at the expense of, it has a lot more noise. It has a lot more kind of texture in the sound. It sounded like a Fritz Kreisler recording or something. It was quite nice. I'm not saying I'm as good as Fritz Kreisler. Don't get any wrong impressions. But when I switched to the Platinum E string, that higher tension and higher gauge E string, the G string also got more focus. It got more attack. When I played the Sassons, it was much more like right there. So those are the differences. You can choose accordingly or what's right for you and your instrument. All right, I haven't seen the timestamp on this one, but I'm guessing that was the most rambly Michael Explains It All edition ever. So I'm gonna stop rambling. The new Thomastik Dynamo strings, you can get them at Fiddlershop.com. I've got pre-order links down there, or in mid-March you can buy them. If you pre-order them, we'll send them to you the day we get them from the almighty Thomastik. And do leave me a comment in the description, in the comments section. I love reading about you, and getting to know you, getting to know all about you, and your experience in playing the Thomastik strings. Let me know if you're excited about these. And yeah, I think that's everything you need to know. Thanks so much for watching this. Be well and practice well.